problems in South Asian youth populations within the United States. He plans to end with some useful tips and tools for parents to support their children during this often challenging stage of development. Welcome, Dr. Patel. Next, we have Dr. Parinda Parikh. She is a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist in full-time private practice. She is an independent consultant for Putnam and Northern Westchester School District through Board of Cooperative Educational Services. Dr. Parikh is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the Weill Cornell Medical College and an attending psychiatrist at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. Her expertise in eating disorder has resulted in book chapters and research publications. She's also trained in diagnosis and management of autism spectrum disorder. Dr. Parikh is currently the medical director of 2nd ARC Psychiatric Associates in White Plains. Today she will focus on cultural differences and attitudes impacting psychopharmacological treatment of psychiatric disorders. She will also touch upon the formal process of assessing disability-related service from school districts or colleges. Welcome, Dr. Parikh. It's a pleasure to have you. And our third panelist is Mr. Devan Ganeshananthan. He is the principal of Edgemont Junior Senior High School located in Scarsdale, New York. He is fondly addressed as Mr. G by his students, including my own daughter, who is one of his students. Among the myriad responsibilities he has as a school principal, Mr. Ganeshananthan has a particular passion for working with families to help support their children through early, middle, and late adolescence. He is the principal of a diverse student body in which approximately 35% of students are either Asian, Asian American, or students of mixed parentage where one parent is Asian. These different demographic factors have combined to create a school environment where students, parents, and the community in general all have an extremely strong focus on academics. And at times, the pressure is unimaginably high for certain students. According to Mr. G, while all parents are ultimately only advocating for their child, there are particular instances in which the academic pressure is augmented by parents' stance on education and sometimes their lack of understanding of the US college application process. At this particular talk today, he will focus on the interplay between these academic pressures and students' use of drugs and alcohol, and also the challenges inherent in this arena for South Asian American students. Welcome, Mr. Ganeshananthan. Finally, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Mrs. Kala Ranganathan. She is the founder of this Empowering Minds chapter and the driving force behind today's event. She has a diverse background in teaching and in information technology. As a quality management consultant, she has worked with many Fortune 100 companies to help them come up to speed with industry standards. As part of this process, she has moderated meetings of all sizes with diverse clientele. She has experience in moderating sessions that ran a few hours and some that even went on for days. Fortunately, we are planning to wrap this up in just 2 hours today. She has used innovative and fun techniques to reduce tension and bring the groups together as a team to solve problems. And today, I see that she is armed with her trusted timer to keep track of time and steer this event smoothly. It's a privilege to have such well-qualified panelists and moderators assembled here today to help us understand this very important topic. With that introduction, I will now yield the floor to our moderator. Kalaji.
Hi everybody, welcome. It's just wonderful to have all of you here. I wanted to explain the process a little bit as to how this is going to work. The goal is to get you involved as much as possible with special emphasis on teenagers. We want your voices and questions heard. So that's why it's going to be very tightly structured so everybody gets a chance to listen and ask questions. This is the process. Each panelist will give a presentation for 8 minutes, and for 10 minutes after that they'll discuss it within themselves to give their insights into the topic, which will be very rich and productive. After that, it will be turned over to the floor. You have 12 to 13 minutes. You have the maximum time to ask questions of the speaker. I would suggest to talk to the speaker who just finished the talk, and then after 12 to 30 minutes, my feared timer will go beep, or whatever sound it makes. I just borrowed it. It's going to make some sound, and then the next person will start, so everybody gets a chance to talk. Again, we request all teenagers to speak up. And if there are, I would please suggest that you keep your questions very direct and to the point, because if you wander into it, it prevents somebody else from asking a question. And I hope you don't mind if I gently steer some of you to finish your question quickly. It's meant in the spirit of making this a very productive session. Is everybody with me? No hard feelings at the end? So after that, there will be a very brief demo of the website, which is a very important part of our approach, because people come here once, but what is being said is going to add value to a lot of people. So as you can tell, you are going to video this whole lecture. I'll put it up on our website so anybody can go take a look at it. With that, is the process clear? It's 8 minutes for each person, 10 minutes discussion with them, and 12 to 13 minutes with your questions. And I think I wanted to say that all of them were very wonderful and said that if you have further questions, you could contact us even after the session. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So let us start. We now start with this step.
In 1971. They actually met through a friend in Brooklyn, and my father came over as a physician and my mother came over actually as a Montessori school teacher, and they both actually had limited contracts, and they were able to actually continue them after they met. And if my father's initial visa application to the UK was not denied, I would not be here. I wouldn't be sitting in front of all of you here having this important conversation. So obviously you can infer that I'm a Sri Lankan American. Both my parents are from Jaffna. They speak Tamil, I am Tamil, and they were fleeing the unfortunate ethnic conflict that was taking place there, and unfortunately resolved or continues actually to continue into this day. I have 2 children myself. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Maya, and a 5-year-old daughter, Asha. And we live over a few towns over in Hastings-on-Hudson, and I am, as was described before, the principal at Edgemont Junior Senior High School. It's a 7 through 12 school, and it's a comprehensive public high school, and it's in a part of the town of Greenberg. And it's currently an unincorporated part of the town of Greenberg. And an important part that I do want to focus on a little bit is the student body there, which is between 30 and 40% Asian and Asian American. And interestingly, although we don't keep statistics on this, I'm interested, it's a personal interest of mine, so I actually did a full surname analysis of all 950 students to see really where might those students be from. And basically, based on my best estimate, thank you so much for adjusting that. Basically, based on my best estimate, it's about 12 to about 16% are South Asian students, or students from South Asian backgrounds or mixed backgrounds, and the remaining of East Asian backgrounds, and really from a wide variety of places. There are students from North India, South India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, really all over, and a wide variety of backgrounds, not all just coming from there, but many families, interestingly, also coming by way of London. Interesting part for me as an educator is not necessarily where the students are coming from, but how they interact and how their interests and affinities create to combine a vivid and very supportive educational environment. This is a school where you could have 3 kids eating sushi, samosas, and pizza, and it's the Japanese kid who's eating the samosas and the Indian kid who's eating pizza. I see a few of my students here. I will call on you by name if I'm going off a little bit. Don't try to hide. It's not that small of a room. I grew up in Maryland, and essentially for my entire life, and I went to a large public high school. That experience has really informed me a lot of how I work with families, work with parents, and also with the team that I'm very fortunate to have actually at my senior high school. If we could just go on to the next slide. I'm not sure if this is going to work because I don't think there's actually volume. But let's give that a try. This is actually the previous slide. We can give that video a short try. This is just a bit of humor just to warm everyone up in the audience and just to get everyone kind of interactive. Actually, the previous slide, if you click the left arrow button, it should go right back, and you could just click on the mouse there on the play button to see if this will work. And we're not going to watch the entire video, actually. Now that I'm reflecting on this, you actually don't need the volume. Okay, so we can stop the video there. So the purpose of me showing this video was just to talk a little bit about, thank you, just to talk a little bit about trust and what the video shows you about trust. Keep in mind, this video was created by kids. No one asked them to create this. They created this on their own, on their spare time, free time. Any ideas about what does this video show about trust? Yeah, go ahead.
In the video, the American kid seems to be like more trusting. Like he's like skipping inside the room with his report card. So, and he's not like hiding it like the Indian kid is. So that means that he like trusts the, I guess like, I mean in the video it looked like it was a brother, but I'm going to say the parent. So he trusts that the parent wouldn't like be upset if it was like a bad grade. Whereas like in the Indian kid video, so in the American kid video, the kid seemed like more like, he didn't seem as insecure as the Indian kids. Like he wasn't hiding his report card in the flower pot, and like he was like skipping over to the like I think it was the brother, and because he knew that the brother wouldn't be mad if it was a bad grade, and he might be mad, but like he trusted that he wouldn't do anything like really bad. Whereas for the Indian kid like hides the report card in the flower pot. So I mean I think that just maybe he doesn't trust the parent as much. I don't know.
Sure. I think those are very, very good thoughts, and thank you for sharing them with everyone. Sure, yeah, you can leave that up there. I think one thing I would really point out, and I know that this wasn't made with any kind of intention, think about the terms that people are using. In the actual video, it said the white kid, not the American kid. And the notion of who becomes an American and who is allowed to call themselves an American is unfortunately extremely elastic in today's political climate. And that was actually something that, was a big part of my growing up. So I would say, just to kind of rephrase what you had said, it was the Indian kid, the level of their trust perhaps was a little bit different with their parent. Essentially, without the volume, you couldn't really tell this. The student has a variety of different grades, an A, a B, and a C. And the parent, the kid who's playing the parent, is essentially giving a different kind of reaction and different level of trust. And you can see in the second little skit, the kid comes in and he doesn't really have that level of trust for whatever reason. And that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just, I would say, it's just different, right? So kind of going into this slide, you see someone falling. This is kind of characteristic of something that's called a trust fall, sometimes a corporate exercise in building teams. And the reason I put this up here is just to challenge everyone to think about the notion of trust and how it actually relates to parenting. It's something that I feel is really the bedrock of any solid parenting-child relationship. Okay. So we can go, let's keep going to the next, let's go through the slide. Let's go through this slide. So essentially, I'll try to compress and condense this. In my experience, sometimes because the trust factor isn't there and the academic pressure can be extremely high, kids are not talking to their parents about their grades, right? If kids are afraid to talk about their grades with their parents, how on earth would you expect them to talk about academic pressure or how to relieve that academic pressure? Which is why sometimes kids may actually take a look at something else. Can we just go to the next slide for a second? I would be thinking the same thing. And just press right again. It's not my kid. But yet again, you're here to hear me talk about this, right? None of us want to talk and think about that this could be actually our student. Our kid has been raised with a lot of love and we've raised them in the right way. Why would they be making these types of choices? We can go just on to the next slide, that would be great. Thinking about what can happen to South Asian adolescents, this feels a little bit overwhelming. My strong suggestion is to make sure that you try to employ what I would call a network approach, which is really to reach out to people at the school, like professionals who are here. That can feel very counterintuitive, culturally speaking. I've heard these phrases from parents in my community where I'm working, from my own parents. What would people say? You need to think about what would you say if it's your child, if your child makes a very poor decision involving drugs or alcohol or something else. How are you going to have those decisions? We can go to the next slide. Again, you need to have them on based on trust. Otherwise, it may end up like this, which is not going to be necessarily productive at all. And again, thinking about the network team, every school has school counselors, school psychologists, usually social workers. Those are the people there to help support your social emotional needs for your student. Principally, when I've been working with Asian and Asian American youth, the main concern is academics. What I usually say is academics will come. The academics will come, you have to trust yourself, trust your kid. However, if you don't take care of the social emotional concerns, everything else will fold like a house of cards. I've seen it in my school, I've seen it with students of all walks of life, not just Asian and Asian American students, but it occurs for them as well. Let me just go to the last slide and see the last slide that I have. Thinking about that network approach really makes sense to have everyone there on the same page and also to have your student involved in that type of discussion. Sometimes, as Asian American parents or members of the Asian American community or Indian American or South Asian community, we feel that we don't want to go and bother someone at the school. We never did this. We don't have to go and advocate. This is your only experience as a parent, and these are your only children, and they mean the world to you. Make sure that you do speak up. You are living here in the tri-state area because of the strong schools, and that's part of what comes with that package, the social emotional support. I do know I want to be sensitive with time and offer, I guess, if there are any questions right now, or we're supposed to discuss those.
Discuss.
Okay.
Let us work with the process of
Sure.
So 10 minutes of discussion, we discuss what was just said. And then we open it up to the audience for questions. I think when you have questions, you can come up and say.
Yes. Sure.
Who may catastrophize when their child is caught using something or is using something and oftentimes need sort of a reality check that it's, I don't know if this is in your experience with parents, but that it's not the end of the world. I mean, this can easily be fixed or treated and they could come out of this even better emotionally.
I have a quick comment on that is, again, this is, I don't think necessarily only in the South Asian community, but sometimes catastrophizing a situation where we have parents who are extremely concerned that the student got some type of mark that they feel is inappropriate in a class, and the whole world comes crashing down. My larger concern is, how are we as a school community helping that parent to build some type of emotional resilience if the parent has to go through something truly horrific, such as one of the parents coming down with cancer, perhaps. Where is the perspective to be kind of creative?
One of the other things I wanted to also add is that fostering communication between parents and their teenage children is something that I try to focus on a lot in my practice, because I feel like, and I will touch on that later on when I present, but I think that seems to be like the focal point for a lot of the work that I do, because it's often broken. I don't know if that's something you also experience as well. Sure.
One thing I would like to share is, we have students who make great choices, students who make poor choices. Those are both kind of euphemisms. In the latter example, in every single situation I've had an Asian American youth who has made a poor choice, and I've asked them, who could you have talked to before you made this poor choice? None of them have mentioned their parents, which is unbelievably telling. It's very sad. It's ultimately disturbing. And I think it signals to parents or people working with students and parents where the effort points really need to be made.
I was just going to add that the stark difference between the Western culture and the South Asian kids is that the Western society allows them to be more independent, more autonomous, where here there is, there are boundaries, there is social hierarchy, and then with that comes a lot of shame and guilt if kids haven't really met their parental expectations. So talking about drugs and alcohol and how they go in that direction when there is unresolved academic issues, unresolved anxiety, depression, all those issues that they haven't been able to reach out to their parents or relatives for.
Do we have time? One thing I was going to add also is that oftentimes as parents, we have to realize that we're also modeling for our children how we deal with stress. So if we're also sort of in denial of our own issues and we're dealing with things by just ignoring them, then guess what? Our children are going to do the same things. They're going to learn from you that, you know, if it's a problem, we'll just pretend it's not there and keep going. And then by that point, it might be too late. So as parents, we also have to look at ourselves and figure out, you know, how can I solve this problem? Maybe I should get into therapy. Maybe I should talk to somebody. Maybe I should be open about things in the family if I'm struggling with something. Because then our children feel like, okay, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to reach out to them because they're reaching out to me. There's a mutual respect, you know, and I think that's an important thing that's often missing in Indian families.
Absolutely. And you know what? So much of psychoeducation is needed even in this day and age, because I was looking at the statistics of dropout rate from therapy, psychotherapy from South Asian families. It's about 80% after first 4 to 5 sessions, which is a shame because really that's where most of the work can be done. Family work, individual work. So it's really very scary.
I was wondering actually, I was curious because I also work in Manhattan and I often see cases where I have these adolescents who are in very high achieving schools, and oftentimes the undercurrent is usage of certain medications or drugs in an abusive way to help, you know, get their scores up. I was wondering if you had experience with that at Edgemont as well.
Yes, unfortunately, drug use and abuse, prescription or otherwise, is not anything that's limited to particular schools. It's an issue at Edgemont as well, and it's not, again, just a particular type of student or a particular walk of life who's kind of experimenting in that way, and that's a significant concern, especially when it comes to a head and we're talking with parents about it, and the parents have no idea that it's going on. It just hits that much harder.
Partly a lot of, especially the illicit drugs, they become so socially acceptable with legalization of cannabis, and then, you know, all the new things we talk about, the wax and the vaping and
all these different things. So it's really a lot going on. And I think that as parents, we all should be very aware of what's happening. So when your kid's coming and telling you, oh, I'm just vaping, it's not a big deal. You better know what vaping is. Or I'm waxing. What are the terms coming up? Vaping, waxing. Those are the two main ones right now, more popular ones.
Could it be feedback because they're both next to each other?
Maybe that one could be
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
I think it's better without it.
I have a pretty loud voice.
Yeah, I have a pretty loud voice as well.
So we still have another 3 minutes. So the thing is, they want to open it up. They want to open it up for questions. So you now have 16 minutes. That's a lot of time. So please come up and ask your questions here. There's a mic, so everybody can hear.
Hello everyone, thanks for really making the time for talking to us about this. Now the question is about the trust, game that we talked about. Trust on both sides, right? So how important is letting go, right? When kids really become adolescents. I see that a lot in Western families, but there is a little bit of hesitation, mostly from our culture. And how important do you all think letting go is, and letting them fail early so they can realize that. So
Right.
just a perspective.
Yeah, so I guess the question is,
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess the question was about letting go, how important that is. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
The mic's not
We could hear you much better on the mic. You are the best speaker.
on the best.
In terms of ability to communicate across the house, you are the best.
But now, yeah.
Don't use that mic. Use hers.
This one, I think this one.
Is this better?
Yeah, good.
Okay, great. So in terms of letting go, I think that really has to be an individualized approach because so many family variables are particularly unique. I do feel very, very strongly in terms of the idea to provide some safety net for failure. Too often, the students at my school, they first may experience failure when they don't get into college. And that's not a good situation. They've never been cut from a team. They've never been told they're not good enough. They've never been told that, I'm sorry, we don't have space for you in this particular program. And while we all want our kids to be involved in everything, there is an enormous, enormous value in realizing and understanding that maybe you can't be part of everything. Before, the stakes are very, very high. Similarly, along the social emotional spectrum, in terms of letting go, we have had a number of students, again, and I try to make this distinction as often as is appropriate, not just Asian American youth or Indian American youth, I would say all youth, who have been under very tight watch with their parents while they're in middle school and really more high school. And they do very, very well academically. They get into top-notch, extremely selective colleges. They have had very, very little social experiences. I'm not just talking about drinking alcohol or doing drugs, just overall social experiences. And when they go to college or university, not some, not even the majority, but a concerning number, they don't have any experience on which to fall back on. How do you interact in this larger spectrum when Amma and Appa are not right next door? I call them Amma and Appa. You guys understand what I'm talking about. But how do you let go in that? You don't want to say, okay, for your 10th grader, there's going to be a huge party. I know the parents aren't going to be home. There's going to be 2 kegs of alcohol. There may be some people in the room right now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, who may be okay with that. And that's not necessarily good or bad. That's maybe just a little different way of perhaps parenting. And there are maybe, I would suspect, many people who would say, absolutely not, you're not going. Absolutely not. But at a certain point, you want to have that other conversation to say, you may be going to something like this in college in a few years, not about how to actually drink or how to actually do drugs, but what are some options that you can create for yourself? if you find yourself, and this is not just girls and boys, and any students really, if you find yourself in a situation that you're not comfortable with, how can you get out? Do you have an escape valve, so to speak? We've had many students in my school, they've developed something with their parent where they just send the parent a word. It could be papadum, or it could be the letter X. And if the parent gets that text message, they know that the kid needs to be picked up. No questions asked. Then the kid doesn't lose face in terms of their social circle, and they can extract themselves from the social situation. They just go outside, the parent is there just to pick them up, and yes, then the parent has to follow up with that. When asking guys
my first reaction to it was a great question. My first reaction to the question was, I think we should define what it means to let go. You know, I don't think it's an all or nothing type thing. I think it's easy to assume that in Western society or in American families that letting go means just letting them literally, you know, be more disconnected from their lives. And I don't think that's the answer. I think one of the wonderful things about our community is that we have cultural events that tie us all together and keep us grounded and keep us family oriented. So I think there's even less danger of letting that happen where we're disconnected from our families, from our children. And I definitely had that growing up in Canada. I mean, I would try to sort of push away from my parents, be closer to my friends, hang out, do this and that. But I always had an event on the weekend. I always had the temple to go to. I always had different things that kind of kept me tied in, you know, with my family, with my parents. So that kind of, I think that helped my parents feel less anxious about me just sort of floating away. And secondly, I think when in terms of letting go, I often have this question in my work. I often see a gender disparity there. You know, oftentimes with our sons, maybe letting go is a little bit easier, but with our daughters, we try to, you know, it's harder to do that. And I think that can have a damaging effect on a very fragile, developing female child. You know, and I think we should, as parents, be aware of that when we're trying to make these decisions. You know, when we're forming our relationship with our female children, just be made more aware that this is a fragile time for them, and I shouldn't be too over involved.
And just to add, because even within the same family, different kids may have different style of responding to you. So you really may want, as a parent, look at, are you a permissive parent, are you an authoritarian parent, or are you an authoritative are you doing authoritative parenting? You kind of not talk about it later on, but you just have to kind of see what works for you. It doesn't have to be that black and white.
Please come.
Yeah, go ahead.
More than asking questions, you know, I like to tell something, share something regarding academics. You know, I teach math on weekends, and I'm talking about a Turkish boy who's my student, you know, who is very scared to take AMC 8. It's like one of the Olympiad exams you take. He was very scared. And I told him, Einstein saying, a person who never made a mistake has never tried anything new. I think this is the mantra you should keep telling yourself over and over and over again. So this year he took, and now he's so addicted to doing very challenging problems. These are, you know, Olympiad style problems. Even I myself have to work it through. And now he's ready to take AMC 10 and A and B this February. So it is a question of giving the confidence, you know, and teaching them how many people have failed and still they have made good. So that really helped. Einstein's one saying, every time I used to put that on the board and make them read that. And if you feel good, that's where you should be good. Regarding trust, I mean, if this is...
What is the question?
I'm just sharing my thoughts.
I think we're going to, if possible, so that everybody gets a chance to ask a question.
Sure.
You could just ask your question.
I don't have questions. Your discussion is good.
Maybe after the discussion, you could share your ideas.
Sure.
So somebody else might have to.
Any other questions?
I have the mindset of the classical Indian parent stock, coming from that kind of a stock. So my question is that people like here are talking about the difference between Indian parents not trusting the child as much as American parents. I find that these are totally two divergent views. And isn't there any way to have trust but verify?
Have trust, but
Verify.
verify.
Data?
Yes.
So have you trust and verify? Like something very famous by Ranganathan?
Yes, yeah.
No. Like you can trust them, but you have to make sure that they're still on the correct path.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you know, I thank you for further explaining the question. In terms of developing that trust, I think it has to start at very, very basic levels. One example that I give is my school is 7 through 12, and every year I have about 4 or 5 parents of grade 7 students wanting to have college meetings with me. And again, not only Asian parents or South Asian parents, but it's really everyone. And I will say no. I want to know do you know how your child is feeling at school? Because it's the first grade in the school. It's a big transition year. Do you know how your child is feeling at school? And oftentimes parents will say, why does that he feels fine. And then I'll say, how do you know that he feels fine? Have you talked to him about that? And the answer is no, if there is an answer at all. And I think I'm using that point to illustrate the notion that that trust has to be developed over time. If you can't talk about how your child is feeling in grade 7, how can these other levels of trust? Trust is a cumulative exercise. It builds and builds and it builds. It has to be built from an early on stage.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just to echo your comments, that, it's true. Once our children get to adolescence, we've already had a certain family culture up until that point. And so oftentimes they may come for help when a certain cultural sort of style of communicating has already been established. And so now the challenge is, how do we change it? My child is struggling and I can't, he doesn't seem to tell me anything. But then when you look at the history, that's kind of how it's always been, because there's very little communication or trust going back and forth. So in those circumstances, you often want to have an outside party jump in and start helping you sort of rework the relationships. So it's a deeper relationship, it's a closer relationship. And that can be very uncomfortable, because again, you've been doing it this way for so many years, and now this stranger is telling me I should do it differently. I don't believe it. And this is where they drop out after 4th session, because they don't want to change. Right. So it's a very courageous decision to get help in those situations. But I think as parents, what amazing humility that we're modeling for them when we decide that we can't do it alone, and we just need to get some outside help.
Can we use the handheld microphone and pass it around?
I think there's some
It's very static. I think it's easier.
Yeah.
we can all hear.
You could try it. It's a little staticky though.
Just go.
Okay, so you mentioned, for the kids' college application, so do you think parents can be involved and how much involved and how can they help with their college application?
Sure, so the question is about how can parents be involved in the college application process. It is an extremely stressful situation, and that's even for parents who have a lot of familiarity with it, especially when working with families who might be having their first child or their eldest child or only child go through the process. That is an additional stressor, and then also considering, is this the first experience going to apply for university in the States? So I strongly encourage parents to be fully involved in that process. Most schools, I'm speaking from my school standpoint, our school counselors take that process extremely seriously. We have actually oriented our resources to give more counseling resources towards those students who are applying. So basically, it's a different ratio of students, a better ratio for the students working with high school counselors. And again, a lot of it is just asking questions. We have parents who all have an opportunity to meet with those school counselors. Every school is going to be doing it a little bit differently, usually once or twice. But then, if parents really want to meet more, 4 times, 5 times, we have a parent this year, I'm obviously not going to say who it is, they've met with the school counselor 20 times. That's not too much, because I know that that parent needs that level of guidance for a variety of reasons, right? So every parent is different, and the school system should be able to evolve to match and meet the needs of the parent.
We have time for one more question. For this round, come back again.
Mr. D, I have a question. Since we are talking about cultural differences,
right.
I, as a parent, first child, I have hardly nothing know about how the school works, how the school.
Right.
So how do you differentiate between advocating and helicopter data? And like you said, the parent went 22 times to the counselor. I mean, I will take counsel will say, oh, she's coming me again and again, she's sending. How do I know? Is it the right thing or no?
So if it's not necessarily the right thing, and the right thing is, it's really a judgment call. It's really subjective, right? So if it is something that the school or the counselor or the school psychologist feels that it's more coming into kind of a helicoptering section, they will let you know. They may not be as direct and say, stop coming, this is too many times, but they will say, this is not perhaps developmentally appropriate, right? The way we work with grade 7 and grade 8 students is very, very different than how we would work with a 12th grade student. If there's an academic or social concern in 7th or 8th grade, the student may not be there for the meeting, but in 11th or 12th grade, the student needs to be there for the meeting, because in about 24 months or 12 months, they're going to be on their own, and they need to be able to advocate for themselves. So it's really appropriate, scaled, calibrated intervention, but also together with the communication from the professionals at the school, you should have a good idea of where your reaching out sits. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wanted to suggest, since there are so many people who want to ask questions, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Why don't we eliminate the 10 minutes talk between the thing and just throw it open to the audience so there's more time. So now, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you.
Please talk into the mic so that everybody can hear. Everybody must talk into the mic.
I thank you for the opportunity. The panelists done a great job. My question is very unusual, maybe you're not expecting it. There are 3 sets of people who influence the life of the student. The parent first, and then the class teacher, and the student counselor. The student counselor and the class teacher have a great, great influence because they are on the teaching end, whereas the parent is always lecturing as the young one follows back. Oh, lecture again, lecture again. So in other words, parents have a limited role to play in trying to carve out the life of their children. What is the role that the teacher and the counselor, particularly age 16 and above, about being sexually active? How do you handle that education for them? That is my question. Thank you.
Sure, so the question was about how do we handle providing guidance about sexual activity at the school level between the teacher and the counselor. The teacher is generally not involved in that discussion at all, perhaps outside of the case when the teacher is a health teacher. And then they're providing essentially very broad-based information, and it's really an informational basis. Sexual activity is highly individualized, obviously, so that's not really the role of the teacher to provide that level of guidance. At our school, when we're talking about student sexual activity, we always take the lead from the parent because we believe that that is really an avenue, or rather an area of concern that naturally comes from the home. And again, very similar to other topics, parents probably in this room have a wide variety of thoughts on that topic. So we want to be very, very respectful of where parents are with that topic. When that topic comes to us, it's individualized, it's work with a counselor, work with a school psychologist. And I can give you a very good example. We had a wide meeting of parent-teacher student organization. This was multiple years back. And not just Asian American youth, but all parents. And there were parents there who had a very, very open view. They wanted their children to have sex before they went to college, so that they would have experience. And then, on the other side, there were parents who were very, very much on the opposite side of the continuum, not wanting their children to have any sexual relationships before they entered into marriage. It's very important in those types of discussions, coming from the school standpoint, to recognize and say, neither is bad. They're just simply different. Parents are in a wide variety of different points with that topic, and to meet each parent where they are, and to also understand, this is where it becomes tricky. Parents may have an expectation here, and students may have a different expectation. And then it plays out, and then the parents become aware that the student is not living up to their expectation, perhaps. And then through some kind of public forum, or sometimes technology is involved, then it all comes to a head. And then it gets a little bit messy, kind of like what Anand was talking about before. Sometimes things need to get a little bit messy before they get before they get better. Yeah.
And just to kind of add on to that, most schools, they have fantastic guidance counselors, school psychologists. So if you have any questions, reach out without any hesitation or stigma, because they know much more about your family than you think they do, actually, from the social developmental history. So they really can be wealth of information in terms of helping how you can manage your child, not only in school, but at home, sexual questions, identity questions, etc.
You would say the same thing for...
Excuse me, I think we need to move on.
Okay, that's fine.
The next round we can come back and ask the same. Can I have the mic?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you have a question, we have time, but let's get on to the next speaker. And we're no longer going to have the 10-minute discussion among the panelists. It's going to be thrown open to the audience right away. So you'll have like 25 minutes. So let's move on to Dr. Patel.
Thank you, Kala. I just wanted to, just press from the beginning. There we go. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for this wonderful forum. To everyone who was involved in getting it together. I think this is a very under-discussed and relevant topic, and I hope we can, really open some doors today on some very difficult topics. Okay, so just a little bit about myself real quick. I'm actually from Canada, born and raised. My parents are from Gujarat. They were both physicians in India, and they came over from England in the 1970s. And then eventually my mother tried to get a residency, but in those days it was harder for women and for women of minority background to get any kind of residency. She ended up becoming, my mother, a housewife. And so my father was the primary breadwinner, and I was raised in a wonderful Indian community. In fact, this whole hall, it's my first time here, kind of reminds me of the cultural center that we grew up in Canada. And I have to say that I was really happy with just sort of that exposure that I had growing up, and hopefully I can sort of lean on those experiences a little bit today. So this is just to start off. It's a funny little cartoon about American parents and Indian parents. The American parent is going to tell their child to be themselves, whereas the Indian parent might say, I want you to be like Sharmaji's son and get 95% on your pre-board exam. We laugh, but academic stress is a real thing, and it's definitely something that comes up a lot in the work I do with South Asian parents. Next slide. Just a few quick statistics. We all know that South Asians in America is a very growing, it's the third largest and fastest growing group in the US. A lot have immigrated recently, and there are also those from the previous generation whose kids are getting older, so the adolescent population is growing as well. But the important statistics are, I think, are following. South Asian Americans, especially those between the ages of 15 and 24, were more likely to exhibit depressive symptoms than the general U.S. population, and that's a pretty recent finding. Also, there is a correlation between depression and parental pressure to become high achievers. So this is another important finding because this is what leads them to my office. And the final point I think we kind of touched on earlier is that South Asian Americans have the lowest rate of using mental health services than any other group, whether it's the overall Asian minority group or just overall. So I just wanted to touch on those points a little bit. Moving on to the next slide. Now, for me, when I think of working with South Asians, I always have to go back to the family, right? The family is sort of the core center in most of our cultures, and it's important to understand the differences between South Asian families and American families. South Asian families tend to be allocentric, right? And American families tend to be nuclear. What is allocentric? It's when the self, the identity of the child and the family's identity are very well integrated. And this happens, from childhood into adolescence, and not much really changes. Whereas in American families, the self tends to individuate from the family, right? At an earlier age, maybe 12, maybe middle school, early high school, they start sort of individuating, have their own sort of independence, autonomy, and that's sort of accepted in a nuclear family. The adolescent status is another important difference. In American families, adolescent status does change. They get, like I said, more autonomous, more independent, whereas in Indian families, they're just usually seen as older children, and they kind of have the same level of status, and oftentimes that can create conflict in Indian families. Now, these next 3 points are parenting styles that I've actually come across myself in my work, and they've been studied as well. The first one is called the training parenting style, and it usually involves high levels of parental control, involvement. Like, I even have this one parent that's secretly monitoring all text messages, like all the time, and thinks she's okay doing that. There's a lot of physical closeness, keeping the child in the proximity of the apartment, not really letting them go out much, and there's an excessive concern for educational success. Now, this is primarily seen in Asian families, but I'd say South Asian families also, there's a subset of parents that adopt this style. Then there's the shaming parenting style. This usually involves guilt, shame, a sort of moral obligation to control adolescent behavior. I kind of went through that myself a little bit when I was growing up. My parents were both doctors, they got hundreds, I got 85s, shame you, shame on you. So that style sort of can have its own fraught with conflict as the child gets older and realizes that it's okay to not be perfect. And then we have the authoritative parenting style. This is the style that I feel is the most well-balanced. It can be if it's done right. It's a style that I kind of adopt in my life. It involves placing reasonable demands that are consistently enforced with sensitivity to and acceptance of the child. I think that word acceptance is very important. Oftentimes we don't give that child that level of status, and they're adolescents, and we need to accept them, their faults and their strengths as well. Next slide. So the next important, I think, thing I should mention as a psychologist is, the thing that I think about when I work with Indian families or South Asian families is conflict. Conflict is often what gets them to the door. That's what's always out of control and difficult to manage, and it usually involves different things. One of the most important things that it involves is the disapproval of American attitudes. Parents who disapprove of American attitudes towards dating and adolescents' desire for independence, who they marry, their career. These are often major hotbed sources of conflict between adolescents and their parents. It's very important to understand that parents often don't recognize their child's ability to make these decisions for themselves. We talked earlier about letting them fail. I think it's not a psychologically unhealthy thing to do. South Asian parents that I often see often hold like a negative view of independent behavior, autonomous behavior, and that's something I try to encourage them. It's a risk, but let's try it. So that's another source of conflict in South Asian families. And then the other big difference is communication style, and this is another major area where I do family work, in which communication style is so different and so stifling in Indian families that it's just a whole new experience to finally talk to their adolescent about what they're feeling and what they're doing and how they're experiencing life. It's just something that maybe they never experienced as children themselves. Whereas American parents and their children tend to have a fairly open communication style. So that's something I try to encourage. Next slide. We can't have a discussion about South Asian adolescence without talking about acculturation and ethnic identity. Acculturation is the process by which ethnic minorities adapt to the culture that they're coming to, and it often results in some kind of change. Some people it's a massive change, some people it's very little change in their beliefs, values, and behaviors. This is a very well-studied concept. It's been supported by the data. I'm not going to go through all the types, but I will say that the most important type, I think, the two types that I see the most often are integration and separateness. So integration involves when a family becomes bicultural and they sort of maintain aspects of their own culture and they sort of acquire some aspects of the host culture. Separateness is more focusing more on maintaining aspects of their own culture and rejecting the host culture. So like I said, those two I think I see the most, and I always try to foster the integration if I feel like acculturation is an issue with the family that I'm working with. The other important concept is ethnic identity. This is something I feel like I have personal experience with. I even remember the day that I asked myself, am I Canadian or am I Indian? I have no idea. You know, I was like 16 or 17 years old and I had an argument with my dad, and it just led to this whole cathartic moment. Unfortunately, that's the bell that I heard. No, I'm just kidding. So I have to say that, you know, it's something that has actually been studied, and when I found that it's been studied, it's something that I try to educate my parents on, helping them see that if you can get your child to achieve some sort of ethnic identity, it can be very positive in a psychological sense. It can give them high self-esteem, high motivation, high academic achievement. So this is a very important part of the work, just trying to educate parents about that. Should I go questions? I mean, there was a...
We'll finish it up.
We can actually skip on. I'll just go to the last part here. Keep going, keep going. Signs of stress. Want to get to that slide for me? Keep going, yep. Nothing more. Sorry, I had to condense a lot of slides to get to this point. Okay, that's good. Okay, so just for you guys as parents, these are some just general things that I go over with my South Asian families of what to look for in their adolescent child. These are just some very general basic things that you may already know, some of it maybe do. Sudden increase in moodiness, mood swings, sudden withdrawal from activities that your child previously enjoyed, negative changes in sleep patterns, repeated expressing of worries. This is an important one because sometimes it's a repeated thought and they feel uncomfortable sharing. Increased anxiety, negative changes in eating patterns. Next slide. Excessive hostility towards family members. And normally when there's sort of a nice family relationship and all of a sudden there's some distance, some anger, that could be a sign of some stress in your child. Parental avoidance, I think we've kind of touched on that. Symptoms of depression, negative change in academic performance, rigidity in thinking. When your child all of a sudden is super inflexible and stubborn and cannot see things more horizontally, then that's a problem. And then increased instances of lying. Next slide. So quickly, what do we do when our teenager shows some of these signs of stress? You know, a lot of times as Indian parents, we don't know what to do in this situation because our parents never did that for us. The first thing I often recommend is talking to other sources to get a real sense of what kind of stress our child is going through. I might talk to a teacher, a coach, a friend, siblings even, your other co-parent, you know, your husband or wife. The second thing I often ask them to do is to listen to their child. Listening is a very, difficult art for some of us because we often want to interrupt and correct, and that's how we were raised, to be parents. But actually, if you just let there be silence and just not interrupt, it can lead to amazing places with your child. Not being judgmental is another very difficult thing for a lot of Indian parents. Asking clarifying questions instead. Don't tell them how to feel. Just let them express how they feel. being open and prioritizing. Maybe that extra math tutoring class is not necessary because it's stressing them out, and just, you gotta be realistic. Increasing opportunities for playtime, modeling for them different ways of managing stress. To me, that's one of the most important things. If I have two parents sitting with me and they're arguing and yelling and screaming at each other, I'm just imagining what this must be like for their child at home. And it's not really modeling how to manage stress. And then finally, showing them that they're valued. That focusing less on external factors such as grades or popularity, and focusing more on value from within and their effort, the effort they place in trying to get through their struggles during the day. That's it. Questions?
First question?
So I'll continue the question that I left out.
Oh yeah.
You talked about the sexual activity refugee, Mr. Chief. So do you see, is the South Asian community an outlier here? Or do you see similar continuum of opinions and thoughts across the Hispanic, African American, Anglo-Saxon, Italian American community? Or are we an outlier? In terms of the continuum of thought, based on religion or culture, that there are people who are fine with it, there are people who say you have to wait until marriage and all that stuff. So just wanted to hear your thoughts. If there's some data you can share, that'd be great.
I would say, in my experience, the South Asian communities, I wouldn't say necessarily an outlier, but it's definitely not towards the liberal end of the spectrum, so to speak, and I'm using that liberal term without any value at all in it. I think, and that is precisely what creates a platform of stress with the bicultural identity of some of the students, essentially going to school in one world, or being outside of their apartment or home in one world, and then coming home to a different set of expectations and values. And that, I think, is what exactly creates that level of friction.
I just wanted to add also that how your child negotiates these two value systems that they're exposed to at school and at home kind of contributes to how they're going to develop psychologically, how they're going to handle these types of situations, and often leads to good psychological health.
Resilience.
And resilience. Yeah.
I had a question related to the record keeping of any psychological services provided to the students. Does that go on the record and affect them? Because a lot of parents are very scared to bring up the issues to the school because they think it will impact their future or whatever. So just wanted to know.
So, there are different, and I'll talk about it in my last slide, but different sort of level of services. Some sort of school-based services, which is 504 accommodations, and then there is IEP, Individualized Education Plan. Now, depending on what the classification is, so if the classification is learning disability or ADHD or OHI, other health impairment, really no big deal. If it's significant emotional disability, psychosis, aggression, violent behavior, that required repeated interventions, then of course it's there. But really the IEP is there for student and it's to help them, and it's not punitive at all. Actually, when they go to college, their school material stays here, only the IEP, whatever's on the plan, goes.
Thank you.
And I just want to add to that in private practice, when I get this question, usually not even in my office, it's on the phone, before they come, they need to ask whether, this record will be ever given to a college or any job prospects. And I tell them that this is a very confidential record. It stays in my system and it's encrypted. It's only authorized to be released on 2 occasions. Usually that's with their consent if they want it sent to a doctor or something, or if there is some kind of dangerous situation and something happens, where it needs to be released to a court. And even then, it's highly unlikely that I'll just release it like that. So it is very protected information. Outside of the school, if you're going to a therapist. I think Parinda talked about in a school, but even outside, when you come to a therapist, it's very protected and not able to be seen.
Absolutely, even more so. Actually, psychotherapy notes are protected from subpoena, court subpoena as well. So please don't hesitate to get your kids helping.
Other questions?
I have a question. What would a healthy assimilation look like? And there is a lot of friction between parents and children as to how far you go before you're well assimilated into the host culture. So what are some of the tools that the parents can use and the children can use to have a healthy assimilation to the American culture?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think that assimilation sort of exists on a continuum also. You know, I mean, every family is going to be different with their own comfort level, but just some general tips to me involve somehow bridging the gap between their school identity and their home identity. I mean, I remember even myself as a child bringing home my non-Indian friends for dinner. You know, that could be a very stressful experience for my parents the first time and the second time, but after a few of those times, there's sort of already that is having a positive impact on their own assimilation and comfort level with the host culture. So trying to, as children, as teens, as middle schoolers even, trying to get your parents involved in some of your non-Indian activities like sports and things like that. I mean, my mom used to come to every hockey game I went to, and she had struggled with English, but she found a way to get through it. And so I think that definitely helps. Also, in doing family activities together in sort of a non-South Asian framework, you know, in an American activity instead of just an Asian activity or South Asian activity, that could also help with assimilation. It all depends on the comfort level of the parents and what they're willing to try. You know, it is definitely a new experience.
So as an adolescent, how do I convince my parents to give me more autonomy and convince them that I can spend time with friends but also balance my schoolwork without being angry and do it in a peaceful way?
Let's ask your question.
That's a question I think I hear pretty much on a daily basis, and yet, it stumbled me. But it's an excellent question. I think open communication and ongoing communication is very important. And again, I said earlier, parenting style, your parents have to identify what their style is and what you respond to, what style you're responding to, right? So if they're constantly controlling you, monitoring your iPhone for find my phone, locate you, right, checking your text, clearly, you have to get to a better place where there is mutual trust and also consequences of violated trust, right? So you're always not sort of goody two shoes in the house and then going out and doing whatever you need to do and come home and be the South Asian good kid again. So it's a really, and it's scary because especially in this area where there are a lot of bar and bar mitzvahs, I'll frequently find girls sort of getting out of their parents' cars in decent clothes, and all of a sudden, 3/4 of their clothes are gone by the time they're out of the party, and it's really scary scene. And I'd rather just see my child dressing that way and help her with the consequences. So I think open communication is the key to having a healthy relationship, not just with your parents, but when you become one.
I used to teach conflict resolution at Iota College, and it was a great class. I not only felt like I was able to help some of the kids understand conflict resolution, but I feel like I understood myself how to help parents use those strategies. And in that situation, as a team, it's kind of you want to find some common ground with your parents. You want to have a dialogue, like Parinda was saying. You want to start the conversation about what are some things I can try so you can see that you can trust me. And then through that shared experience, the trust starts developing, right? But it can only start with dialogue. And the other thing I would mention is when you find yourself getting angry, or you find your parents are getting angry, then I think the conversation has to stop for a period of time, and maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Recognize that it's not being productive right now, and walk away, and then come back when things are calm. It doesn't mean that you can never revisit the topic again. It just means you got to revisit it when you're calmer, right? So that would be my suggestion.
I think that's a great question. Kind of reflecting on my childhood, I wanted to have a lot more freedom, and I wasn't getting it, and I was determined not to give my parents any excuse to say no. So, I was very, very strong in school, academically, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, didn't get my license immediately to drive. But then immediately after I talked about all those things, I kind of listed, I made a list. I was very responsible, presented the list to my parents, and said, I want my curfew to change. I don't remember what it was, but for discussion purposes, let's say it was like 10 o'clock. And I said, I wanted my curfew to be later than 10 o'clock. These are all the things. I don't have any tattoos. I don't do any of these crazy things, right? But then it was very apparent. None of that made any difference at all. It didn't make any difference at all. I could have said, I've already graduated from university. I didn't even go to my, undergraduate. I already have a PhD, and I have all these different things. But then, what really kind of unlocked a little bit more trust was to talk to my parents about why I wanted to do that. I was very, very involved in running track and field, specifically, and most of my friends were in that space on the track and field team, and I wanted a little bit more time to spend time with them. And once I talked to my parents a little bit more about that, they understood why I was interested in spending more time with members on the team, and then the whole thing made sense, right? Because they understood that that was a big part of my life, and it was kind of an equation that was circular in a way. Since it was such a big part of my life, if I was going to spend more time with those kids, consequently I wouldn't be able to do anything completely crazy because that would affect my performance on the track and field team. If that makes sense. So that was rather convenient in my situation, but it really came down to being able to express my feelings to my parents, and it's reflecting back on many, many years after the fact. I'm surprised that I had that level of depth of thought as a kid, that kind of just putting everything on the table, it didn't make any difference at all. But once I had that larger discussion about why it was important to me, that unlocked a little bit of the dialogue there.
Questions?
Two questions.
Just one question regarding the question which we talked about the trust. Like I have two kids, like one went to the college and one is in middle school, like high school. So it's hard for me to speak on the mic. But the main question is, when you are a Southeast Asian parents, when you ask your child, tell them what your opinion is in terms of the trust. But a lot of times what we hear from our kids is that our teachers know better, our counselors know better, and they don't trust their parents, and their parents are able to give them a sound advice. They feel, oh, you haven't been there, you didn't go to business now, so you don't know better. And it's very difficult, even if you try to tell them, like, be it a college application, be it what kind of a classes or courses or something. For some reason, I always felt they feel like we don't know much. Like, they feel like as parents, even though we are educated or something, they just feel like because we didn't really study here, we didn't really went to college and schools here, they feel that, you guys don't know, that our teachers know better in terms of showing the college applications or courses they want to take. They trust their counselors more, which I feel is a little bit hard as a parent.
So what is the question?
The question is, how would you help parents in that situation? Because obviously they spend much more time in school and college with the counselors, and then you are...
You feel like an outsider.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to let Devan and Anand answer that, but all I'll tell you is, when they are telling you that, validate them. That's how they feel. Let them own their feelings. Because the minute they're telling you like, oh mom, you don't understand, my teacher knows it better. Immediately your reaction is, I've been there, I come from Bombay, what do you mean, this is harder than, so you completely sort of unvalidating them, and that really sort of creates a little bit of sort of lack of trust, a lack of openness. So validate how they feel, say, I understand how this is how you feel. The other thing I've commonly found just reading few Asian families is, in the sort of midst of this conversation of colleges, what courses you take, AP, etc., parents sometimes will hijack the entire college planning or what courses they should be taking even at college level. And I think that's a problem. Again, let them take the ownership of their lives.
Let's finish this question.
Okay.
have it and then come back to your question. Finish this question.
Yes, I think that was a good answer. You covered everything. There's one more question.
It's going to come later.
Okay.
Because we have another half an hour left. I'll do the first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. So my name is Parinda Parikh. I am a psychiatrist. Can you hear me? My name is Parinda Parikh. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist. I practice here in White Plains. I was trained at Cornell here in White Plains. I have two kids, a 12-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. Aside from my private practice, I'm also the school psychiatrist for Westchester County and Putnam County here. This is an honor. Thank you for inviting me. This is a topic very close to my heart, and I do this every day, so thank you. All right, this is my favorite slide, teen brain under construction. So whether you have a South Asian kid or a Western kid or any kid, all teen brains are under construction, well beyond 10 years and even continuing into young adulthood for most people. So I think we have to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So I think Dr. Patel and Mr. Devan covered quite a bit of what I'm going to talk about, but difference in Western and South Asian culture. Western society embraces independence. It emphasizes self-expression, personal uniqueness, and self-sufficiency, autonomy, independence. Whereas the South Asian society emphasizes interdependence, group solidarity, social hierarchy, respect, and personal humility. Nothing wrong in either of those models, just two different styles. Next slide, please. I have a couple case studies. I kind of just put it out there because these are, somewhat connected to what I see on a day-to-day life, except with different names. So here, Neil's a 14-year-old high school freshman student in the district, lives with two sisters and parents. He's been a high achiever and had not needed any academic interventions. His parents have been helping him with time management, homework, organization, keeping him on track with his procrastination. Now Neil is in 9th grade, started refusing school as he could not keep up with academic demands and homework. He was staying up late nights without any improvement. Parents brought him to me for concerns of anxiety and depression. So now this is, typical of what we would call our smart South Asian kid, high average to superior IQ, testing results not showing anything, except for some processing speed issues. And when you administer scales to the teachers and to the parents, you'll sometimes see a discrepancy because parents will be minimizing the executive function problems. But from the teachers, you'll hear that this child actually has been struggling with inattention, focusing, concentration from 5th, 6th, 7th grade. It's just gotten worse now with the increasing academic demands. And so this is a kid where you have to sit down and explain to them what ADD is, what executive function problems are. The big concern is parents are worried about what will they explain to their extended family, that why is he receiving services in school or why is he seeing a psychologist. And really, I think we have to overcome that stigma. We have to really go beyond those judgments and realize that these are disabilities and their medical needs just like any other medical problems. And I think the more aware we are, the more accepting our children will be of the help they need. Next case study. So here, Raj is a 17-year-old high school student struggling with anxiety, depression, and OCD, obsessive thoughts. He had been isolating, withdrawn, doing poorly in school. During our meeting, he confided in me that he's struggling with sexual identity and not sure how to address this with his friends or parents for fear of alienation. He was referred for therapy where he is working on individuating, learning assertiveness. Parents are fairly anxious. I wouldn't say fairly, parents are so anxious and nervous. Every morning, afternoon, and evening, I'm getting the text. Is he okay now? Is he okay now? Like, this is not okay now. This is a long-term work. He has to resolve this. And this is something we don't, again, talk about in our South Asian communities. But it is a growing problem in the teens and young adult. Again, extensive psychoeducation is needed to help this family just understand what their son is going through. And third case study I put out there. So here, Shivani is a 15-year-old in a prestigious school. She comes from a large Indian family. She was always compared with her successful or prettier cousins. Shivani grew up with low self-esteem, thinking she was worthless. Parents would periodically say, you're a disappointment, you're a failure, you're stupid, whenever she did not do well. Shivani became increasingly resentful and started hanging out with other struggling kids. She engaged in a lot of impulsive, reckless behaviors, which now left her with shame, guilt, trauma. And even after all these, Shivani is now 26, and parents are still micromanaging her life, calling me behind her back. And I have to remind them that A, she's 26, and B, that I don't mind discussing these issues in her presence, but I will not play this game of triangulation. So again, these are real life examples that you probably see there, very common what we see. Next slides. So with South Asian families, the paramount issues are family obligation, loyalty, self-sacrifice, and obedience towards elder. It is different than individualistically oriented Western culture. And what this does, all these issues, they really give room to intergenerational conflicts, cultural conflicts, that we really need to understand and work through. Next slide. I'll skip the slide because Dr. Patel talked about the first four. Really, I just wanted to focus on the last one, cultural corruption. What is cultural corruption? When parents sense an autonomous or independent teenager and they respond by applying increased pressure on the child to conform to their expectation. So that's cultural corruption. Really, I think you have to learn how much the teens want to interact with and adopt the values and practices of the dominant culture. And you really try to help them to retain their heritage, the wealth, their culture, your cultural belief systems, your practices, and how you can help them retain them. Your best effort as a parent should be on consolidated bicultural identity. You're trying to help them pick best of both. Next slide, please. So common reasons for psychiatric referral seen in South Asian community. Challenges related to ethnic identity development, parenting stress, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, academic issues, learning disorders, ADHD, relationship issues, career choices, personality disorder, substance abuse, and other than psychotic disorder and schizophrenia. I will quickly skip through the next couple slides because they're just facts. We'll do that. Just one more. Yeah. The estimated annual cost on mental health is $247 billion in US, and about 13 to 20% of kids experience some sort of mental disorder in a given condition. So suicide is the second leading cause of death among kids aged 12 to 17. Something to really keep in mind. What are the concerning behaviors? I'm just going to reinforce what Dr. Patel said. Decrease in enjoyment and time spent with family and friends, decrease in their academic functioning, memory, attention, concentration, frequent stomach aches, headaches, backaches, hostility, aggression, yelling, disobedience, neglecting their hygiene, not taking showers, not changing clothes, not making beds. Don't run in there and make the bed. See what's going on. So really try to look out for these symptoms. Next, please. I think Dr. Patel talked about this, and it's been a theme, the different style of parenting, the authoritarian parent attempts to shape, control, and evaluate the behaviors and attitudes of the teen in accordance to their code of conduct. And any deviation from that would result in forceful measure to curb the child's self-will. This is very dangerous because the kids are constantly under the absolute authority of their parents, and they're really stripped of their own independence or free will thinking. And really that's where you find a lot of deceit, a lot of trust issues. If you look at permissive parents, they are at the other extreme, allowing their kids to kind of do as much as the kid wants, and try to be their peer, their friend, rather than a parent. And that's a problem too, because these are kids who are sort of essentially making their own independent decisions with very little parental guidance. And eventually when parents were to jump in for like college decision making, by that time parents have already given up their position as authority figures. And if you look at the next slide, so this is the parenting model that actually works, because here children are encouraged to make their own decision and exert their own freedom. However, boundaries are well established from the beginning, not just in teenage years. And compromises and negotiations with parents must be made, as Mr. Devan said, how he was pushing boundaries, but work through with the negotiating sort of with his parents. So very important. Rather than dictating your child, this parenting style actually is where you are listening to your children, their point of view, and you sort of, teaching them bargaining, teaching them negotiating, teaching them real life skills. Okay. Next slide. These are quick slides, just what, I'm sure the audience knows ADHD is a concern, what it is in terms of symptoms, inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. 3 to 6% of the population has that. It is pretty debilitating. If you go to the next slide, it talks about learning disorders. And if you want the slides, I can later on share it with you. In service of time, I may just skip through them. And then depression and anxiety, which are not sort of on the forefront for South Asian kids. They are poorly diagnosed or missed, mainly due to the stigma, until the child starts having school failure, school refusal, relationship problems, etc. There we go, school refusal. Approximately 1 to 5% of school-age children have school refusal. Rates are similar in boys and girls. It occurs at all ages. It is more common among your 5, 6, 10, and 11 years old. And there is no socioeconomic or cultural difference. So something to keep an eye on. Substance abuse, Mr. Devan talked about it. Alcohol, this is again teen data, but binge drinking, alcohol, 40%, marijuana, 16%, and you can see the other illicit drugs. Just last slide, this is important, school-based resources. So the biggest problem we have as South Asians, we tend to be reluctant to seek out counseling due to the cultural stigma and an emphasis on keeping family matters private. I said there's substantially higher rate of dropout in counseling compared to the South Asian kids. Compared to the Caucasian kids. If you reach out to your school, you will have a lot of services available, the 504 accommodation plan. If that needs are higher, individualized education plan. Part of that can include resource room, learning center, counseling services. If the child is younger, there is early intervention, CPSC available with occupational therapy, speech therapy. So really, your school should be your primary source of, service requests, just to understand what's going on with my child. The last slide, really. So I want people to understand, I'm a psychiatrist, but people get disappointed when they don't walk out with a prescription from my office. Medications are not first line for most psychiatric conditions. However, they are very helpful in treating underlying moderate to severe symptoms of these conditions. Many families reflexively resist supporting psychiatric medications because they believe they should be able to manage their lives without it. Needing biochemical support is seen as a weakness. And that's something I think we have to overcome. Because, we don't know much, but we do know that brain chemistry is a real thing. It's not made up, and it's not a weakness. So last slide, to sum it up, successful parenting, help your kids develop self-reliance, resourcefulness, resiliency, and allow them to fail, allow them to make mistakes. You don't have to pick them up all the time. Guide them, facilitate their goals and dreams rather than imposing your unfinished achievements and unresolved successes onto them. Help them consolidate their biocultural diversity and identity. Thank you very much.
This is a great panel, I would say. Regarding authoritative parenting, right? The word sounds great on the screen, but we have no idea what this is. And if you can help us understand this better, to help our children and ourselves. And do you have sessions, when you and yourself do sessions, do you have sessions where you sit with the child and the parent and do a role modeling, like, the child is talking to the parent, we're talking about autonomy, right? The child is talking to the parent, or the trust. What is it that the parent lacks? Or what is it that the child should look into changing the way they can convince their parents? So do you do role modeling sessions for?
Definitely role modeling, or what we kind of term that as like a family therapy session, where the first few steps are usually involve observing how the family interacts, how the parents interact with the child. And oftentimes we get a sense of the style of parenting within a couple of sessions, sometimes even just one session. I got an idea, what's going on. And then before I do a session with all three, I would want to meet with the parents to discuss my observations, to discuss things that I'm seeing and get their feedback on that, and then try to figure out other ways of handling the situation. Maybe they didn't realize certain approaches to their child is not effective. Let's try a different approach. And then maybe we would go to the family session where they could actually try to rehearse or try some of these things in the moment with the child. It sounds easy to say. It's never really easy in practice because, teenagers, as Parinda was mentioning, they have a brain that's constantly developing, even at this age. So there's a lot of emotional outbursts, there's a lot of reaction to any kind of change. So it may take multiple sessions before a parent could feel comfortable trying this new approach. And just to answer the earlier thing you mentioned, I know authoritative and authoritarian, they sound very similar, but they're very different, right? Authoritarian is a lot more tougher and very little room for any kind of discussing or negotiating or communicating, whereas authoritative is more balanced and there's more of a dialogue back and forth with your child. There's mutual respects and boundaries, but you're involved. You're not under-involved, you're not over-involved. You're at the right amount of involvement. So just to clarify that distinction.
And, I stopped doing therapy, so I rely on all the psychologists, and thank you, Anand, for doing that. But it's a constantly evolving process, even as they're talking to each other. So my general sort of help to parents is, if you're telling your child no, which you have a right to, explain them why it's no and what will it take to be yes. Because a lot of times we get into this gridlock, no, I said so. And it doesn't work because it's a growing mile, they don't get it.
Power struggle.
It's a power struggle, it's a gridlock, and then you're done. So if you have a no for whatever it is, no, you can't go to your friend's house tonight for sleepover, but because I'm worried about you or because you haven't, whatever it is. But it is, again, you're encouraging a dialogue, you're encouraging a negotiation here.
I just wanted to add also, one of the things that I've seen in recent cases is that before we can even get to the stage of trying to help rework how the family communicates, I often realize that there is a divergent style of parenting between the parents. So I may have a mother that is constantly on top of the child, very authoritarian and needs to control everything and is involved, and then I have a father who is super permissive and gives the keys to the guy, gives him a car, and is completely undermining the authority of the other parent. And so then before I can even get to any kind of dialogue, we have to get some unity between the parents on how to parent their child. You know, maybe it's their divergent backgrounds, maybe this is a window into their relationship, you know, where one is permissive and quiet, the other one is loud and domineering. So it's such a complex situation from case to case, you know.
And I think what we have to remember for all our second generation kids here, a lot of us are from our sort of home countries. So we actually grew up in this different kind of parenting style. So a lot of behaviors that we kind of enact or act out really is how we were raised, how we sort of became quiet or subdued when our parents said no. So really it's a lot of work to be done.
Maybe that will not be more useful than others. It's excellent in the presentations, and I love that. And I'm always confused about the issues that you guys have talked about. And especially Dr. Patel, you say something about ethnic identity. I think this is a subject that's being discussed all over the world, especially in Europe and especially in America. See how people can assimilate or integrate. And you say that integration is important. But I'm personally confused because this center is called India Center. And when we bring our kids or myself speaking, isn't that we are giving a flag, that's your identity and that's what you should conform to, not, you should not integrate. I don't know. You say you went to similar cultural centers when you were young, yes, and you loved it. But for me, it's a tremendous confusion. Should I bring my kids here and teach them that that's your identity, you should not integrate? Okay. Sorry. I finished it. And Dr. Parinda afterwards, she said it should be her term, selected acceptance. Don't you think this is totally confusing to everyone? Yes.
Okay. Just to talk about ethnic identity, I think the confusion starts with just the word itself, ethnic identity. What does that signify? When I'm referring to it as a goal for my South Asian teens, I'm referring to it in the sense of finding their own unique ethnic identity. Now, it could be that their ethnic identity is one in which they're not that involved in their community, a little bit, but not, they respect it, they understand it, they explore it, but they're more Americanized. I mean, but that's their ethnic identity. They have some connection. With others, it might be a stronger connection. So I think the important point I was trying to make is that I want the kids who achieve, South Asian teens who achieve some level of ethnic identity is a very healthy thing for them. It's psychologically healthy. We just don't know what that looks like with every child. We just have to see. And bringing them to a culture center is definitely going to promote that, because this is now counterbalancing all the Western American experiences they have at school. And so they have exposure to multiple facets of themselves. And I think that's what I was trying to say.
Just to kind of add on to his point, adolescence, it's a very funny phase where they are looking for that herd mentality, that group acceptance. So whether you give them group acceptance at India Center or group acceptance at vaping under the school staircase or something, or stairwell, or alcohol party at friends, but they're really looking for acceptance. So you don't have to, again, be on two extremes. You can find the balance between two. You don't have to spend 24 hours here and not take them to the hockey game or ice skating that they love. If that makes sense.
Can I just follow? Go ahead. So whatever I'm noticing, you're trying to give us a middle path, balancing all that. But what I see in American societies, particularly, so we're talking about Indian society versus the mainstream, or in greater term, I should say, Indian society. I mean, so American society. But I see there are ethnic communities like Amish, like Mormons, like Jewish, Hasidic Jews. They sort of brought up their kids in a very, very strict manner and strict guidelines. Still, I see those kids are successful in certain ways. I don't know, I do not know very much about the society. But do you think that's a negative thing for them to do?
I'm nodding my head because part of my other sort of business, because I have so much time on my hand, I have about 700 Hasidic Jewish patients I treat. I'm like their psychiatrist, one Monroe, Muncie, Williamsburg, Borough Park. And it is a highly nucleated society where the kids, boys, after yeshiva, 7th grade, don't even speak English. When they come to see me, their wives, because they all get married at 18, somewhere between 18 to 20, their wives are translating for them. So really, and that's talking about other extreme, where they really have no idea what's going on in the world. So they may be successful, they may be businessmen because they have the intellect, but really they haven't acculturated.
Well, we also, if I may, the question is, we've talked about the Western society as a very broad term, right? And there is a huge continuum in the Western society as well. And not just in the Hasidic Jews or whatever, right? Even in Hispanics, African Americans, everybody, the Europeans too. So in all of your experiences, is the South Asian community and our culture more closer to moderately conservative, Western world values, right? It's not liberal, it's not fully liberal. We are incorporating parts of the liberal identity and thought process into what we're building as our own unique, culture here, right? But we are moderately conservative, right? That's probably how I would define it. Not liberal, and we are not conservative too, but there is a middle of the ground. And I'd love to hear your opinion and thoughts on it.
We are evolving.
We are.
So what was the question again?
The question is that we use very broadly, right? American, Western value versus Indian values. But I just want to ask that question: Is there? Aren't we making a too broad of a comparison here? Right? There is also a part of the American society which is like that, not the conservative ones, but the more moderate ones.
I mean, I think when you're speaking politically, absolutely, there is some commonalities with a certain segment of American society. But I think when we're referring to our teens growing up in American society, I mean, they're going to be exposed to kids from families that are all levels, right? Liberal, conservative. I mean, one slide that I didn't actually get to was all about our children's experience of racial discrimination since 9/11.
Yeah.
I mean, now with 9/11, it's like a lot of South Asian children are treated differently, differently than they were pre-9/11, I'd say. And that is definitely a uniquely American experience, I think. And so, even though we may have some commonalities, I think they're being raised in a society where they're exposed to all different levels of American culture, so it can cause some kind of stress.
I have a question for Dr. Parikh. You talked about mental health issues and how South Asian parents are reluctant to seek counseling because of the stigma. And on behalf of parents, it must be very hard for them, coming from our society, to accept this and to explain this to the extended family. We are not comfortable talking about it. How can we help the parents get the support and continue living a normal life with the society, with the Indian society?
So, I think for parents, it's important to understand, because when they see their son or daughter experiencing anxiety or depression, their immediate reaction is, well, this is just minor thing. We've been through this. We've been through worse, and they're immediately comparing with what they lived through in India or elsewhere. And again, most important thing for parents to do is to validate how they feel, and then you can sort of just open up your mind to what is possible, that your child is not you. You may have the grit, you may have the resiliency, and you can work on getting the child resilient, but the child at this time is not resilient. And also, instead of sort of shutting down and dismissing the help, just being more available to just hear about it. And I've had parents who will say, thank you very much, I won't hear from them, and then 3 months later, they're back now with worsening of the symptoms, and that's still okay. I don't look down upon them, it's just that's the time it took them to come to this very tough decision. The only time I tell them is, I think South Asians in general, we tend to sort of let our Mossy and Mama and everybody know what our little Johnny is going through. And I explain them that it's really not a family problem, this is Johnny's problem. We have to help him and really offer him the utmost privacy. This is what he wants. So that's the biggest problem, because even simply put, I've had kids, especially young adolescent daughters, but who say, well, I heard my mom telling her sister that, I was, whatever the behavior she was doing, or I was depressed. It's not necessary. If you need to went to a therapist. But don't go around announcing to the world, because it's very painful to them. As it is, they're struggling with anxiety, depression, and it does affect their self-esteem. I don't know if that helps. But
I would add that also that I've encouraged parents to seek out their own counseling in situations like this, because in a lot of ways, this is almost like such a devastating change. And sometimes it's a little bit overblown, and it's because of their reaction to it. They can't manage themselves, they can't handle it. So even seeking therapy for a short-term period can help them navigate, that transitional period to just accepting that this child has got this thing that they're dealing with, and I'm going to try to be supportive and not let my own feelings come in the way.
I'll tell you something, it's almost comical, but I almost fell off my chair. I have this Gujarati patient who first time they came to me, and when I met, this is the same girl who's now 25, then when I presented here, and one of the things she said when the mom went out, she said, the whole day my mom said, "Tu gandhi chai," which means you're crazy. And she'll say that in front of everybody, and now it got to a point where the mossies and mommies and everybody were like, oh, gandhi chai, right? How painful is that for a 25-year-old to feel like that? And so one of the things I had to do to this Gujarati mom, I'm like, no matter how angry you are, you cannot be talking like this to your child. Well, she doesn't listen to me, she acts out. I said, I don't care what she does, take her in her room, talk to her, but you can't tell her body shape in front of, so just to kind of explain to you, parents need to be in their own treatment.
Can I just comment that, that having events like this, you're asking how parents have events like this where you're having those discussions about mental health or psychological issues. Sorry. No, I just, because I hear you, you said how can we help parents, right? And I'm just thinking that having events like this where you're giving parents the opportunity and you're bringing people to discuss these issues is how you open those discussions and desensitize and normalize it.
And you also reminded me, I think what we don't have in our community, which is quite in other communities, is support groups. Support groups for parents with autism, support groups for parents with children with depression, support groups for parents struggling with drugs and alcohol. I think it'd be a fantastic project.
Agreed. I definitely agree. I think we need more of that, more education, more awareness, and normalizing, like she said, is important.
I think there's time has run out for us. If you're interested, we should plan more events like this in the future. Now we'd like to move on to show you our website. Just to give you an idea as to what we kept on permanent record. The video of, can you hear me?
Yes. At the end, I really want to talk for 5 minutes. Then I'll be
Yes, after that. Yeah. What we are taping this, we are videotaping this whole session, and it's going to be put on our website as well. If you want to share it with others and let them see it too. Nitla, have you said?
Yes, this is.
It's a very simple website. Our group is called Empowering Minds. If you have ideas or want to work with us, if you want to start some of the subgroups, please come to us and we'll do our best to work with you. All this, so you have to go to the blog. This is the front page. We have blogs. this is the last page. You have to go to the room. There are resources there that are given. You know what? I think it's okay. It tells you some of the resources that were given us by the panelists are very good. Soon there'll be the video of the whole session online. The only question is we have to give you the URL, right? So if you left your email addresses there, we will send you the URL. And the other thing is give us a little time to upload all this. If you want to share it, give us a little time and then we will. If you get the URL, that means we've managed to upload the video.
Thank you, everybody. Please leave your name and email addresses in the sign-up sheet in that little table so that we can send you the website address. So we are going to be updating the resources, list of resources here. And our panelists have given us the list of resources, so it's a very valuable information out there. And now I call Anita to...
Someone wanted to say
Somebody wants to say a few words before. Oh, sorry.
Let her finish the task.
I think we're running out of time. Sorry, we have classes after this, so I can't be very long here. So I do want to thank everybody for coming here, and I think it was a great session, and having these panelists here helps a lot. I can just say that, coming to, so your question I wanted to answer in somewhat one line that I have brought in. So I got familiar with India Center about 5 years ago, and before that I used to get those questions. You're not in here, you don't know how system works. My kids are still in high school, but I used to get that questions even when they were 4 or 5 years old. But coming to India Center, the topics that you were talking about, that you have a collection of people who are talking among themselves, I think that happens at India Center by itself. Like, parents are talking to themselves, to teachers. So when my kids came here, they stopped telling everything about, oh, you are Indian, that's why you have this. You are, you are the only ones who are talking like this. They stopped raising questions about sleepovers, why we can't, because when they come here, they see all the parents feeling the same way, having the same issues. So I think this becomes a therapy for us here at the center itself. And it has helped my kids, and it has helped me a lot. And I feel it really will be helpful. And these questions, you will still, I think, get more questions to be answered, and more topics to be talked about. And I think it's a good interaction point for all of us to be here and at least coming and discussing and being open. And I think that's the most wonderful thing that we have. Thank you to all of you and Kalaji and Nirmala for bringing this topic. And I think just coming here, it shows that we are trying to make a difference in communication. I think is the main thing that we all parents lack, because if my parent even today say no, I don't ask them why. It just comes automatically, like it's an auto button. But when I say no to my kids, I have to explain that. And that's what we need to understand, that the communication is very important. And that's what we have been able to get to us, to parents, to kids who had some questions too. So I think it's all very good, and I would like to thank I would like to thank Bharti Rao, who's not here right now, but she sponsored the gifts for all the panelists here. And I would like Nirmala to each one of them please call out. Thank you so much.
wanted to say something.
I just want to talk a few words.
There are business cards here. The panelists have left business cards that you can pick up if you want to talk to them.
To be in the table.
Regarding the trust, I like to quote a real life incident that happened in New Jersey on 2009, January 1st. This is an Indian family raised in a very conservative family. Their parents never liked her partying, and they always said no. But this girl grew up. She wanted to be an American, like more partying with the American people. So in December, in December, her mom and her 6-year-old brother went to India on a vacation, and then she just started at Columbia University. She was a freshman, and then she visited her parents. Her father was home. She visited them, and then on New Year's Eve, she decided to go out for a party with her friends. And then, she just pretended. She put the pillows as if she's sleeping, and then she just sneaked out of the house, and then she partied. And then in the morning, her dad leaves to hospital at 5 o'clock, and usually he opens the door, just says goodbye, and then before he leaves to hospital. And that day, she was partying so hard till 2 a.m. and she said, no, I have to get back home. Her friend, he was drunk, although he was 18, and he just decided to drive her back. And she was in the back seat without the car seat. And he just drove very hard, and then it was a mid-sized car. It made a very sharp turn. It was an accident. I don't want to give more details about it. Although the mom was actually blaming the system for that, the school said, if alone your child had trust in you, that she has the other side, that she wants to party, this incident would have never happened. So it's a famous quote from Chanakya, when your child is little, you can discipline your child. But when your child is a teenager, treat him like a friend. If there is anything that is going on as a parent, you should be the first person to know. This is a real-time incident, and the kid who drove the car was charged with first-degree murder. There are a lot of nasty things that happen. So to gain the trust of a child is like one of, I realized when I heard this, it's a heartbreaking story, it's a real story. I heard, to get the confidence of your child is the hardest word you can think of. That is one. And there's one more thing I want to conclude regarding, I have a lot of Asian parents. Asian parents means Filipinos and, from other countries who are my students, and they come and tell me, oh, the education system is so slow. I don't like American education system at all. Look at what they are studying there. Cousins back in Asia are doing so much better than them. My advice to them is, your child can learn swimming, piano, violin when they are young. Purposely, the education system has been made slow in this country till 5th grade because your child can, learn other interests. You never know. The child has to take up so many things, and finally, when he or she is in middle school, he's going to go down on just 2 interests, whatever he has tried. And another thing I tell all parents is, it's not China. China has got only one entrance exam to university. You make it or break it. If you don't score enough, you're doomed. That's not the case in the United States. You have SAT. You can take the test 3 times and the best score goes. Even if it is AMC, the American Math Olympiad contest, you have 2 chances and the best score is taken. So America is always one. So you should appreciate the system, take all the help you need, from the people around, and then that will be helpful. And another important thing that I tell all Indian parents is, please let the child play. Let him learn to fail or lose in a sport, because when he grows up, when he loses something, because of his sports attitude, he knows how to face real time.
I have questions outside. Please help us
themselves.